In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi, welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stoffer, and we welcome Jill Dickey. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Eric. It's good to be
I,
back.
I think our listeners are familiar with you now.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are we going to be discussing today?
Well, I'm kind of I'm chuckling a little bit internally because of how many episodes we've kind of dragged out of the idea of differentiation. And no one will be surprised to understand that we are still working on that.
I think we can milk a couple more out.
Yeah, this might be the last one.
Okay.
So just to remind everybody that right now we're working on, you can go back and listen to the series. I highly recommend it if you haven't done that at this point. But if you're following along and you've kept up with this, we are now talking about the concept of tolerating discomfort for growth. And we're doing 3 podcasts on that skill alone. And the first one we did on tolerating discomfort for growth was cultivating a spirit of curiosity. The second one is learning how to have deeper levels of self-compassion. And this is going to be our last one. And we're going to be discussing values. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
So,
Because,
so
go ahead,
curiosity, compassion, values.
self-compassion, yes,
Hmm.
self-compassion, and then values. And I want to explore the topic of higher self intentions and values because these ideas and concepts can be really helpful components of tolerating discomfort for growth. We tolerate discomfort much better when we have direction and purpose amidst the discomfort. So kind of think of like an anchor in a storm or like a compass that helps us navigate when we're lost. And so values can kind of serve this function when we're dealing with a lot of discomfort.
So it's not, we're not just tolerating discomfort just to tolerate discomfort. We've got to have vision and purpose behind getting used to the discomfort.
Yes, I'm so glad you added that because we do know from understanding how humans work is that when we can find purpose in our discomfort, purpose in our suffering, we handle and tolerate it a lot better. And values and higher self-intentions can be a way to find that purpose and value in the discomfort. So Eric, do you remember several sessions, episodes. I keep saying sessions.
That's the therapist.
I cannot
I
help
would say
myself.
classes, several
Yeah,
classes
okay.
ago.
Yeah, so several episodes ago, we talked about emotional regulation and we talked about a 5-step process, I think 5 or 6-step process to help people work through their emotions. And it was kind of that name it to tame it,
Mhm.
right? Find it in your body, put it in context, normalize it. And then step number 5 was to find a value or locate a higher intention that can help you anchor. And then the last step was to take action in the direction of those values, if that value or high intention that you identified. And what I think is interesting is it can be really challenging when I'm working with this process with clients. It can be really difficult for them to do that step number 5, where I say, okay, I want you to locate like a higher intention or a value that can help you kind of get direction of where you want to head as far as behavior and choices in this kind of storm of emotion that you're dealing with. And they just look at me like, I don't know. Like, what do you mean? And so I want to talk about that today because I think that um, this can be such a good thing. Personal values significantly impact mental health by providing a sense of purpose and direction, like we've been saying, for our behavior and choices.
So why is it that so many people don't is it that they don't understand the concept or they just haven't identified those things for themselves? They haven't
That's
done the
a,
work.
that's a really good question because I think it's a little bit of both. Like
Hmm.
sometimes they don't understand the question, and other times it's like, oh, I haven't really thought about that. I haven't been really intentional about figuring out what my values are. And for
Is
some
this
clients, really easy to do. They're like, oh, okay. And they can kind of grab onto something
Yeah.
pretty quickly. But for a lot of people, oh man, that's a good question.
Would this be similar? I mean, we hear a lot of these phrases in our day of like, find yourself and who are you and who do you want to be? Is a lot of those kinds of questions?
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. I think a big part of knowing yourself, and we did a whole series on that too,
Hmm.
right? Can be not just knowing the parts of you that are hard to face that you need to kind of face and look at and work with, but also knowing like who you want to become and really understanding what your direction is and your purpose. That can be really helpful as part of knowing yourself. In fact, very essential, I think. And
Hmm.
what we do know is that personal and relational well-being is enhanced when we live authentically, meaning that we live in line with our deepest core values and higher intentions. That's where well-being really sits, is when we're living that way. So, and conversely, when our actions are not aligned with our values and higher self-intentions, we struggle with incongruency. And we can be, that can lead to a lot of higher anxiety and stress and decreased self-esteem and all those things.
Incongruency, like friction.
Well, just being, yeah, is that the way we would describe
Well,
that?
I'm just saying, like, if you're aligned with your values, if you're
hmm
living within what you truly value,
hmm
it feels smooth. Whereas if you're going contrary to that, it feels icky. It feels sludgy.
Yeah, and I would maybe say something a little bit like sometimes living in line with your values, making choices that live in line with who you want to be and what your higher intentions are, your values, it can be
Sure.
really challenging.
Yeah, it absolutely can
And it
be
can cause a lot of, struggle sometimes, but it does help us in the struggle. That's the idea.
because you're motivated
Mm-hmm.
to achieve your ideals.
Yep. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the positive impact of having strong core values and what the research says on it. All right. So none of these will be shocking, but I think they're worth mentioning. And we've kind of been saying a little bit of this, but let's just enhance a little bit more. So the positive impact of strong values, it gives you more meaning and purpose. So when individuals live by their values, it gives their life a sense of meaning and purpose, which can buffer against the stress and promote resilience, which is what we just said.
Hmm.
The second one that I really like is that it provides a decision-making framework. So values act as a guide for making choices, and they're not just random choices, they're purposeful choices that align with your beliefs. And this leads to higher levels of satisfaction and self-worth as you're trying to navigate. I mean, I can't remember the number. I'm not going to get this right, but I was listening to someone talk about this not too long ago, and they were saying like the number of choices we make in a day. And it was something like we make like 400 and something choices a day just around what we eat.
Yeah.
So think about how many decisions human beings are making a day. And I don't know about you, but it sounds good to have sort of a navigational system inside of me to help me make those choices.
Yeah.
All right. And then the last one that I had down for the positive impact of strong values is social connection. So values like, and this was your top one, okay, when you sent me your list of your top five, were values like compassion and kindness. If you cultivate values like that or have those that can foster positive relationships, more social support, and can be crucial for mental health because we know relationships are so important. We've talked about how important that connection is. Okay, any thoughts on those? Do you want to add any or?
No, I think that's great. I think what a really cool thing to identify that it helps with decisiveness.
Mhm,
Because so often in our wrestle to be our own selves, um, we wrestle with how am I going to be perceived? How's someone going to feel about me?
mhm,
But if I am if I'm motivated by my core values, it really doesn't, I mean, it's funny because mine is, compassion and kindness. And that it sounds a little bit like apathy for me to say, you really stop caring what people think about you when you're motivated by your own values.
mhm,
But that's the truth. Like even with kindness, right? If I'm motivated by that value of kindness, I'm not worried about the repercussions for my efforts to be kind. I'm going to believe that it works even when I'm, even when I'm not great at it. Any effort to improve in that value is going to be worth my time.
Well, and can I even enhance what you're saying a little bit further?
Yeah.
It's that if kindness and compassion are core values for you, maybe what you'll learn to stop doing is using other people to support your sense of self, and you'll be able to love them better. And that is kinder and more compassionate.
That's like you're assuming that I do that, and
I'm I'm more thinking of like this is what humans do, not you
our
specifically.
listeners just went, "Whoa, sister dropping a bomb. That's unkind."
Well, and I don't want to, I'm not, I guess I'm isolating you and calling you out, but I think that a lot of people can relate to you. I can,
Give me an
right?
example, not an example from my life. I'm not that vulnerable right now. But give me an example of how people use other people to validate their values of kindness and compassion.
Um, okay, let's say you're putting me on the spot to come up with
That's
something.
because that's because you're thinking of all exact examples in which the way I do that. But
Actually, I'm not thinking about you. I'm thinking, okay, let's say this. Let's say um, you are a parent who believes down deep inside that your children are responsible for your sense of self and your emotional regulation
so you put the burden of them managing your emotions
on them.
on
And
them.
it's really, really breaking down your relationship and making it difficult to navigate and hard to handle. And if you're going to try to break those patterns, it's going to be very anxiety provoking for you to do that. And so, a value that you can kind of anchor into as you're trying to work out of these instinctual patterns could be I want to be kind. And what maybe I need to see is that it isn't kind to do that to another person. And that may help you anchor into something that can help you manage that anxiety better because it's
hmm
a value to you to be kind.
Well, I
Was that a
told you
good
not.
example
Oh, well,
or
I
was that
told you
confusing?
not to use one from my life, but you failed at that. But
Well,
anyway, in my journey of learning how to do that, it's amazing how often I catch myself in my new approach to parenting
yeah.
by saying, "Hey, you know, it's almost like, Kate, I catch myself that I'm about to say something that is going to come across that they need to manage my emotions. But then I realize, okay, so then do I really even need to say something? Because if I'm going to say
Mhm.
something, how do I phrase it in a way that doesn't come across as they're going to manage my
Well, and
emotions?"
you're doing a great job, Eric, of kind of describing what your internal
Yep.
process is as you're trying to be more differentiated from your kids and be in a healthier relationship to them. So as you're working through that anxiety and everything in you wants to do the old habit of, saying something to get your kids to do this for you, what's the value that you're anchoring to keep you from doing that instinctual thing?
Right. Yeah.
That's the point.
I should be, if I really value kindness, I wouldn't value kindness just to make me feel better. I would value being kind to others and not putting that
Yes.
burden of responsibility on them.
Yes. And the other thing you're saying is to really understand that word kindness and what really is kind and isn't kind. So there's a
Yep.
lot there. It's very loaded what you're saying, but it's kind of taking us in a direction that I want to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about
You're
the
welcome.
thank you.
Yeah.
You're so good. Okay, so negative impact of value conflicts. Let's look at what some of the research shows about when we're not really clear about our values and we're not navigating from values or higher self-intentions, what happens? So we have a lot more internal conflict. So when someone feels pressured to act against their core values, it can lead to internal conflict, guilt, and anxiety. The other thing is stress and dissatisfaction. Trying to live up to values that are not authentically held can lead to stress and dissatisfaction in your life. And then low self-esteem. Lower self-esteem issues is that failing to live up to your own values can negatively impact your self-worth and the way that you experience yourself.
Can I go back to the one that was in the middle there?
Yeah.
So let's say that someone really values kindness, for instance, right? but they realize that they they don't want to interact with certain people because I don't know, they're judgmental or something like that, right?
Hmm.
And so then when they get, kind of called on that, like, hey, you're being unkind, um, is that what, can you even restate that sentence again of that middle one? What was it?
Yeah. So it's trying to live up to values that are not authentically held by you
Yeah.
can lead to stress and dissatisfaction in
Because
life.
you've got to have follow through, right? If you don't have follow through to that value, you're going to feel the internal hypocrisy that you have.
Hmm.
But here's a question I have, Jill. So if we're so blind to the fact that we don't actually hold our values, right? If we just think that we are, but we have these blind spots, we don't realize we're actually not living up to it. We won't even realize we have hypocrisy in those things. Is that making sense what
Yeah,
I'm
and maybe
asking?
yeah, and it's probably a learning process, but even in the learning process, if you state of my val, I really think that in my core self, not because someone told me to think to say, not because someone told me kindness should be a value, but because I think it is. To me, I think it is really important, and I can start to see how important that is to me, and that I want to live my life as a kind person.
Right.
Then even that value itself will help you learn about what kindness really is.
Yeah.
And it will help you set aside false notions of what kindness is and really understand what real kindness is. It's still a compass for you
So
as
can
you're trying
you
to sort that out.
so let's say you feel like this is a value that you have, whatever value it is you identify. And then you realize you don't want to do the work. You don't want to do the work for that value. Do people just drop their values and say, you
Um,
know, like a cornucopia selection of
Maybe.
whatever
I mean,
values they
I,
want?
I think I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. I don't know that they drop the value. Maybe they just kind of ignore it
Yeah.
more, you know?
I
And
realize, well,
can
maybe I'm
values
not
change
that kind
over
of a
time?
person.
Yeah, I mean, can values change over time? Probably.
Yeah.
I did hear some research that says most people's core values, like really basic core values, are established by the age of 5 or 6.
Mm.
So that's really interesting. I won't get into that because I don't know how well researched that is, but I did
Yeah.
hear it. Okay, so I think what would be helpful, Eric, is just really defining what values are to get
Okay.
really specific and granular about this. Um, Values denote a degree of importance. So I want you to think about like the monetary value of something. You can think about it like in terms of money. Okay, things that people really value costs more, in the monetary world. And and so morally, a value is an ideal that we give a high degree of importance to. And how then once we know what they are, the question becomes, well, how do we identify which ones we espouse to? Because your core values are your top 10. Like, let's say we made a list. We had a list of 200 values, which I think we can link to one of these lists because they exist. There's a lot of them. And you and I selected it down to our top 10. We may have some overlap and we may have some differences. So the question becomes, how do I, as an individual, determine what my highest core values are?
Hmm.
So can we go through some questions to kind of help people identify this and start to explore?
Let's do it. So, listeners, as you hear these questions, just ponder them in your own mind. Try to
Yeah.
identify what your values are.
Yeah. And I will say again, just there, one thing that was really helpful for me when I was exploring my own values in like a really structured way like this is you can go online and type out, list of values and you can print them and look at them so you have them right in front of you. And it helps with the analysis of this as you ask these questions.
Do you want
So
me to respond to these or is it rhetorical?
no, I just maybe these are the questions that listeners can maybe write
Okay.
down in a journal or
Yeah.
something so they can start to explore or think about these. Okay, these questions are, and I have three frameworks that I think help people find values. And then you can decide, listeners, which one sounds the most salient to you to use. So the first framework are a list of 5 questions, and this is off the website of Susan David, who wrote Emotional Agility, which is a book we talked about when we were talking about emotional regulation, and just how integral having a set of values that you anchor to when you're trying to emotionally regulate and not let your emotions run your life, but your values run your life. It's really important to know what your values are. So here's her 5 questions. Number 1, deep down, what really matters to me? Number 2, which relationships do I want to build? And not just relationships with people, but there's lots of ways like to nature or to a company or something like that. Number 3, what do I want my life to be about? Number 4, during which activities do I feel the most alive? And number 5, if all my stresses were gone, what would my life look like? What things would I be pursuing? So they're not easy questions just off, you could really spend a lot of time really thinking through each of those questions. What do you think about that set of questions?
I love it. Yeah, I think those are good measures for us personally, um, to reflect on. Every one of us should be asking those questions.
Hmm. I think so
No
too.
shame. I'm not putting pressure on anyone. Just we
Do
should.
it,
Yeah.
everybody. Do it.
Everybody do this.
Okay, let's do another one. Let's do another framework
Okay.
that I like. And I can't remember where I got this one. I should know, but I can't remember. It's not coming to my mind. I'll try to find it. But this was a framework that I heard at one point, and I wrote it down because I thought it was so good. So this is 3 ways you can look at your values through this kind of a lens, which is, first of all, personal stories. Look at the stories in your life. When have you been the most happy? Which achievements or experiences are you most proud of? What has been your biggest success and what has been your biggest failure? What do you fear most? What past experiences are you most ashamed of? So that can, by kind of looking at your life as a narrative, can help you kind of pull out values that you've already navigated by. And that will help you identify which values are there already by
Help
looking at your life.
me help me understand how identifying what you fear helps to identify your values.
Mm, okay, so maybe I would say
Is it like the antithesis of that fear is what we
I
value?
am afraid that people will see me as unproductive
Mm.
or
So you value
lazy.
work or being
Yeah,
productive.
yes,
Well,
something like
how is that not I value being viewed positively by my peers?
it could be.
Mm.
But you can have that value and not have it be about your self-worth, but it
Yeah.
could still be of value, right?
Okay.
It's just kind of a roundabout way to get you to what you think is important.
Okay.
Now, if it is important, the only reason why it's important is so that you don't get judged. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's not really a value. I don't, that's at least what came to my mind.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
that's helpful.
Okay. So the next part of this framework is priorities, because values and priorities are really linked. And I personally think this is the easiest way to find values. How do I use my finite resources? Money and time are both finite resources for most people. Time is a finite resource for everybody. Money is a finite resource for most people. So, how are you spending your finite resources? Where do you spend your money and where do you spend your time? You could literally go, like, the next question is like, where does my cash go? So, go look at your bank account, go look at your credit card bill and see where you're spending your money. You could also look at your daily calendar and your to-do lists and see what you're prioritizing. So that's one way. And then the third part of, oh, go ahead.
I'm not going to answer those questions. I know our
Well, it
listeners
may,
really want to know what I spend my money on, but
okay. Well, I mean,
I don't want to disclose what my values are.
I know. Well, that's the thing is when I thought of this, I was like, oh, maybe I need to reevaluate some of my values. I don't know.
Well, and then maybe this is another thought, though, right?
Yeah.
In the checkbook, you might look at it and you might go, wow, I really like uh, something that might seem frivolous to someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you may not see behind that purchase is the intent of it, the
Mm-hmm.
consecrated intent of it, right?
Yes.
So, like,
Yeah.
if I value a vacation with my family, yes, that may cost money. It may be a privilege that a lot of people can't afford. But if I'm doing that, I'm not doing that so I can flaunt my finances. Not that I have a lot of finances to
You're
flaunt,
doing it
but
because you value time spent with your
because
family.
I value,
Yeah,
yeah, I value memory creation
exactly.
with my family.
Well, that
And
was just a good example of how looking at your checkbook can help you define your
yeah,
values. You just did
yeah,
it. Yeah.
like develop positive, healthy relationships through the
Yeah.
investment of that money.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Last one is passions, the things that drive us emotionally, because passions drive us towards things and away from other things. So, some questions around your passions. What am I hoping to achieve in my life? What do I dream about? If I could have one wish that could be immediately fulfilled, what would it be? What are your theoretical, philosophical, religious, or political beliefs? What do you really care about in those realms? When something goes wrong, who do I turn to for support? And then who do I follow on social media? What books do I like to read? Things like that. That can help you identify your passions and the values that come along with the passions that you have. So that's
May-
that framework.
Maybe I've shared this before, but a dear friend of mine, Steve Flammer, who was a great middle school counselor, the phrase he said more than any other that I remember was he used to say, "We do what we truly value."
Hmm.
And so if we just look at our schedule, if we look at our calendar, we look at our time spent,
Hmm.
then we realize, obviously same thing that we said earlier about the checkbook, right? It may not be exactly what you see on the surface of your schedule, but you really can start to see what it is that you truly value by how much time you spend doing those things.
Yeah. Steve is spot on with that because people can give lip service to a lot of values, but when they really play out in their life, you need to look at action. Where do they put their energy? Where do they put their time? What choices do they actually make? Says a lot about what they value. Mhm. Okay, last framework. And I really like this one because it can be a little less broad and a little more specific. This is my favorite one from a therapist. His name is Russ Harris, and he does a lot with acceptance and commitment therapy. And he acceptance and commitment therapy is a framework for working with psychological content, but it's very the values identification is a huge part of acceptance and commitment therapy for anybody who's familiar with that modality. And so he has this really cool way of working out values. He puts them into categories, and there's a worksheet that we can link to in the show notes that you can print, and it's in the shape of a target. And he breaks the target into sections: work and education, which includes workplace, career, education, skills development, and learning. Okay. Um, and then the second category is relationships, including your partner, your children, your parents, your relatives, your friends, your coworkers, and other social contracts. So, what are your values in that section of your life? He also does personal growth, which can include religion, spirituality, creativity, life skills, meditation, yoga, nature, nutrition, all of those things. And then his fourth category is leisure. How you play, relax, stimulate, or enjoy yourself can say a lot about your values. And I will do this with clients quite a bit, is hand them one of these worksheets and say, I want you to come back, having filled this worksheet out and figured out two or three values in each of these categories. And then we're going to link them with goals that they have for themselves in those areas. So um, that's one of my favorite frameworks because it can be a little bit more specific.
Let
Yeah.
me ask you a question about um, acceptance and and commitment. Is that what it is? What
Yeah, it's
was it?
called acceptance and commitment therapy.
Okay.
Hmm.
So in that is the motive there to identify your values. um I guess the word acceptance is probably throwing me off there, right? So
Oh,
if is acceptance like accept the way that you are, even if it's not great, and then commit to just being that way? Am I that I just totally
yeah. I mean,
I'm just playing as the listener here, what the listener might be wondering.
this could be a whole podcast
Yeah.
series talking about acceptance and commitment therapy. The quickest way to answer that question is this framework teaches people to accept their internal experience and external experience in a way that they're not fighting against it all the time.
Mm.
So it's about accepting the emotions, thoughts, sensations, and impulses that are part of being human. Because when we fight against those, it creates a lot of challenge in people's mental well-being and their ability to function. So it's more like relax and accept these things, know that they're part of the human experience, but you also want to commit to a value-based life in the face of those.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I think the
Hmm.
word acceptance gets there's a little bit of a stigma and misunderstanding about the word, right?
Yeah, right.
Is oftentimes, people think, well, if you're going to push acceptance, then you're just telling people to kind of give up on self-improvement and growth. That's not what it is.
It's
Uh
similar to like what we were saying in another episode. I can't remember which one, where we were like, all feelings are acceptable, all
yeah,
behaviors aren't.
yep, that's right. Yep.
Yes. And then
All
the
feelings are
values, the
accepted.
values piece comes into, okay, so if all behaviors aren't acceptable, how do I choose my behaviors in the face of all this stimuli? And the best way to choose them to live a life of intention and growth and development is is value-based living. It's the
Right.
anchor point. It's the compass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do I improve on those things still aligned with my values in a
Hmm.
way that is going to help me to grow in that value?
Yes. Yes, exactly. So, for instance, I can give an example. I can accept the fact that um, I easily get anxious, and when I'm anxious, I'm irritated. That is the way that I function in life. And so I can learn to accept feelings of anxiety. I can accept the thoughts that come with that, the emotions that are there, the impulses and sensations that anxiety produces in my system. And I can even accept that I feel angry and let that be real for me. But then my value will say, well, I value respecting others. And so that means that when I'm feeling anxious and irritated and upset with people, I'm going to anchor to a value, which is respect. And the way that I respond to that anxiety and anger in myself in relationship to another person is going to be anchored in the value of respect. So that means I'm not going to yell, scream, condescend, call names, control, demand.
You. Just kidding.
I have done that
That's
before.
the
And
brother
so
sister.
if I'm kind of changing that way of life for me and trying to improve my relationships, then that's how I'm going to be functioning.
Right.
The
Yeah.
value is going to be the anchor point, not the emotion, even though
Right.
I'm accepting the fact that it's there. I'm not resisting it, but I'm resisting where it pulls me to.
Yes. So
Mhm.
if I value differentiation, for
Mhm.
instance, right?
Yeah.
And then someone is unkind to me, I might think, oh, okay. So because I value differentiation, sorry, no, because they're unkind to me, I in order to be true to myself, I should just respond however I want. But if I really understand differentiation, I might ask myself, now why would they do that? Why would they do they really understand what they were doing? Did they not think about how that might make me feel or my loved one might feel? And so if I really value differentiation, I extend that grace to others as well. or their lack of understanding of differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound right, or am I off?
No, I just might use the word differentiation a little bit differently because I don't know if you can value differentiation. It's what you'd be valuing is personal growth and maturity.
How about authentic relationships?
Yeah, right.
Authenticity.
Yeah.
Authenticity is definitely a value.
And so basically, Eric, what I would say to that is kind of overall concept is that you are thinking through this already in the sense that, okay, I know what my initial responses to things are,
Hmm.
my limbic kind of instinctual response to things are, but I'm not just going to let that be the driver of my bus. I'm going to pause and pull back and put a valued self in the driver's seat that has their hands on the steering wheel. And
Yeah,
that's going to steer the direction that I go with this particular incident, this particular stimuli. How am I going to handle that?
I'll give you an example. So this week someone really hurt one of my children,
Mm,
and I was I was angry. I was fuming mad,
hmm.
angry. Uh, as
Understandably.
as angry
Hmm.
as I have been maybe in my whole life. I was
Hmm.
so angry.
Hmm.
And so thankfully I've got an incredible wife who will just listen to me as I vent, who also was angry and vented to me as well. And it
Hmm.
was great because we were a safe place for each other. We weren't going to cast final judgment on how we were responding to this situation, a little bit uncontrollably, in a safe environment. But
Hmm.
man, it felt good to vent a little bit, right?
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
after we were done, kind of venting and going off on this, we thought, okay, but what do we do with this anger? We
Hmm.
can sit here and gripe and complain to each other, but is that really what we want to do? Do we do we want to just get everybody's support because we're victims of some mistreatment? Or do we want to rise above this in a way and um find and learn from this so that we are aware of how these things could be our own blind spots? So we've been kind of going back and going, have we ever done this to anybody? Have we ever treated someone's child this way? Or have we ever led our children to treat one of somebody else's child that way? And I'll be honest, the anger was it felt good to vent because I was upset, but I also man, a whole lot of growth and learning has come from reflecting on the anger and
Hmm.
just going, okay, I if I value authentic relationships, if I value kindness, if I value compassion, then the anger is not gonna it can't stay very long for me
Hmm.
because I value these other things more than just my response to that scenario.
That's a great example. Can I just say a little something about the anger part, just for the listeners who can
Yeah,
relate to your experience? The way that I think about anger, not always, but a lot of times, it's a really high energy response to something that you care about being under attack, right? It
yeah,
it it does expose what you value in a lot of ways because there's something really vulnerable and something really precious that's not safe. And that really strong anger feeling is high energy and can be quote unquote protective in a sense. It can feel like that because it's such high energy. So we got to be really careful about anger because it makes a lot of sense. There's no part of me that's like, Eric, you shouldn't be angry.
right, right,
Yeah. But what I'm loving what you're saying is that that wasn't your end point.
right. Yeah,
Your
I
end
think
point was value directed, how to handle this. How do we handle this from our higher self intentions and our higher values? That's the real thing.
yeah, I think what happens, especially in a spiritual dialogue, we have a tendency to think of anger as sinful.
Hmm.
And I think really what that dialogue is trying to say is our intent to cause harm out of reaction,
Hmm.
our intent to build contention.
Hmm.
Um, and those maybe, I mean, depending on your belief system, those could be, uh, an error in our thinking. But an emotional
Yeah.
response to a circumstance, God gives us emotions,
Hmm.
and we are to learn from those emotions.
Yes.
And like you said, for instance, the protective instinct of a father or a mother to protect their child, that is not
Hmm.
something to be shamed or ashamed of, right? I mean, it
Right.
is my responsibility to protect my child, and if that child is hurt, man, I want them to know they're safe. I want them to know that they can heal. I want them to know that how they were treated was not okay. It's not acceptable. And but man, yeah. So I think that semantics of kind of redefining what how we see anger. I'm not saying we make excuses for bad behavior, but I'm saying we
Yeah.
have. I love how you say it, high energy. It's a high energy response to a
It is,
stimulus.
I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah,
It makes sense that it would show up. And the other thing that I like to talk to people about with anger is sometimes your anger needs to be spoken for. So maybe when
yeah,
you handle this situation, you might end up talking to whoever it was that hurt your child and saying, I felt really angry about that and for good reason.
yeah.
But speaking for your anger can be really productive and helpful, but speaking from your anger doesn't always accrue to the best solution.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like striking a balance between advocating for yourself and also having a certain level of healthy ambivalence to a scenario,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And it's just
Yes.
balancing, not feeling like
Mhm.
one or the other.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so let's see. Mm, should we do that or skip it? Let's skip that part. Um,
Sorry, I
I
had
wanted to bring,
too much
no, it's
response
okay.
time.
It's totally okay. I wanted to just bring up one other like thing to think about when you're thinking about values is there's a term or an idea about what's the word I'm looking for? There is what is known as morally deficient values. So just to make sure that people understand this, I want to mention it. This morally deficient values refer to a set of boundaries or a set of beliefs or principles that kind of go against widely accepted ethical standards. So they're often characterized by a lack of concern for the well-being of others. And it's like prioritized by like personal gain at the expense of others or condoning harmful actions like dishonesty or cruelty or exploitation. So, especially essentially values that would be considered morally wrong or unethical in most societies. So someone could say, I value having power over others, right? That's a morally deficit value. Someone may value that, but that needs to be looked at.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
where is the line on that? Just how widely accepted something is?
Yeah, like think about the values that you maybe you hold and think are they ethical? Are they based on common standards of human decency and humanity? Mhm.
Does
I
that
value becoming the most wealthy that I possibly can,
right?
you know.
So does that evolve? Does that change by society's opinion?
Um, Maybe I don't know enough about it, probably
Yeah,
depending on the culture you're in or something like that. But I don't know. I would think that most things that are truly ethical are probably universal.
like fundamentally,
Yeah.
like
I think
murder is bad.
yeah, yes. Yes.
Abuse is bad.
Or you could say, I value my personal freedom over any other consideration.
Yeah,
Even if me having personal freedom infringes on the freedom of other people.
to me, we're not going to get into politics, but to me,
Sure.
that's what we see with politics, right? Is that one
You can.
platform values something, and it is a value, but this
Hmm.
platform values something, and it is a value. And so it's
Hmm.
competing values in so many ways, and
Hmm.
disagreements, obviously, on how those
Yeah.
values are seen by each other.
Yes, exactly. So what we know about morally deficient values is that they have a negative relationship to mental health and to
Hmm.
individual well-being and to relational well-being. So if those kind of values come up, you might want to analyze those as you're thinking about it. So, like I said, power, being better than others, money acquirement at any expense. I value never feeling like I'm ever wrong. Things like that. Those are not those are not the ones we're looking for. Okay.
What if it's true?
So,
What if I'm just never wrong? Do
well,
you think our listeners are
if
starting
it's true, if
to
it's
identify
factual,
our
what you
use
can't
of
argue with
humor?
facts, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Self-deprecating humor and sarcasm.
Okay. So we before this session, I mean, I was going to talk about how to leverage values for mental health, but we kind of already did that, talking about your scenarios. So I think people understand how to
Hmm.
use your values for well-being and choice making and healthy relationality and things like that. So you named your top 5 values after a value analysis. Do you remember which ones you came up with, or do you want me to read them to you?
Go ahead. I
I
think I
just I
remember them,
just
but
gave Eric a list, and these are the 5 that he gave me back. Number 1, compassion. Number 2, love. Number 3, kindness. Number 4, authenticity. Number 5, faith. Those were yours. Do they still resonate?
oh yeah. It's
Okay.
it's funny. You hear that and it swells the emotions, like to my
Inside of you.
core. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like to my core. I'm like, yep,
Okay.
that is truly what I value. I don't know how great I am at valuing them. I've probably got a
You
lot
mean
of
like
work to do.
aligning your behavior with them?
That's what I mean. Yep. Yep.
Hmm.
And I've probably got a lot of work to do. And I think I do try to work. I think I invest a lot of my time and energy into those things. I'm not saying I'm great at them. I just know that that is truly what drives me.
And it's fine to reflect on how well you're aligning with your values and your behavior and choices, and do an inventory like that. I think
Hmm.
that's great. What's more important to me, I mean, that's important, but what feels even more important to me is that you know what they are. You know what your navigational system is. So that in the face of challenges like the one you just shared, where someone was unkind to your child, the values did come into the way you handled that, the way you processed it, and maybe what you decided to do about it.
Yeah.
So it they what if we're pulling it back to tolerating discomfort for growth, tell me how that worked for you. Do you see the connection in that
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah. Can I give you another one just so I can maybe have you help me? And maybe this will be
Yep.
good for our listeners. Another example, but
Yep.
like for instance, my value of authenticity.
Hmm.
So every once in a while, I'm in a setting, a social setting of some kind, and the lack of authenticity is just so. This will sound really judgmental. I'm not trying to make it sound that way. I'm just trying to say sometimes the lack of authenticity just makes my skin crawl. I'm just so uncomfortable because
The lack
it
of authenticity you see in others, or at
in
least you
others,
perceive in
in
others.
other, yeah, what
Okay.
I
Yeah.
perceive in others, and so it kind of like inside, I feel like I'm just judging and judging and judging because I just feel like it's so unauthentic. Um, but I don't know what to do with it. Like I don't know, that sitting in discomfort. Um, I need to do something about it. I need to, and I don't know if it's like, do I say something or do I just go, oh, well, I guess I wouldn't do that. Or
Well,
it just
let's do
sounds
this,
like
Eric, and
even
then
me
we
saying
can.
this publicly makes me feel so stupid. But
Okay. I love that you brought it up. Let's do this. Let's do therapy, shall we?
okay, sounds good.
Let's use the 5-step process. And as you listeners hear us do this, think about how this value-based thinking and anchoring helps you tolerate the discomfort that you're going to be tolerating in order for you to grow through this experience. So,
Okay.
step number 1, what try to describe the feeling as precisely as you can that you're experiencing.
Yeah. I physically feel almost sick to my stomach, literally, like some
Well, that's
nausea.
where you feel it in your body. So put your
Yep.
hand on your stomach there.
Yep.
But I want you to
Okay.
be precise about naming the feeling.
Um, uh, like being manipulated and um like
Like you
someone's
think you're
attempt
being manipulated?
yes, like well, I don't feel like I am being manipulated. I feel like um they are attempting to manipulate me, but I see right through it, but I don't have the courage
Okay,
to
but that's
tell
not a
them.
feeling. So I need you to try and see if you can define the feeling that you're
Yeah.
experiencing. It could be like disgust or anxiety
Okay, yeah.
or
Anxiety for sure,
mhm,
disgust, a little bit of anger,
mhm.
um,
And maybe
um,
even condescension,
yeah, yeah,
superiority.
sure. Like from me.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
definite superiority. That's one of my big problems is that I
Okay.
feel like my values should be everybody's values. And so anybody who doesn't value it
Oh,
or see it the same way that I see it,
uh,
then they are up a creek.
okay. So this is good because this will take us into our next
Thanks for
episode,
helping me point
obviously,
that
about
out,
boundaries.
Jill.
Okay, so now we've identified the feelings. We've identified where you feel them in your body. So you said your stomach. Where else do you feel them?
In my neck,
Okay.
tightness here in
Okay.
my throat.
Okay.
Um, and then it's almost like a feeling of flight, like I got to get out of here,
Okay. All right. So you're feeling like a
and
fleeing
some fight too. Like
and some
some
fight.
part of me is
Okay.
just like I want to call it out, but
Okay. All right. So let's put it now we've named it. We've located it in the body. We've named the feeling pretty precisely. We've located where you're feeling it in your body. The third step is to put it into context. It makes sense that I'm reacting this way and experiencing these feelings and sensations because
yes, I would say it makes sense that I feel these feelings because I have had to learn them the hard way from my own mistakes
learn what?
and
Learn what?
learn learn the values that I have that cause me to be frustrated uh in the behavior or the thoughts of others who 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 either aren't good at showing those same values or don't have them. Um,
So what let me make sure I'm understanding you because I don't want to move on until I get it. Okay,
yeah.
so what you're saying is I feel these feelings of disgust and repulsion and anxiety because I recognize in others ways that I have been.
Well, maybe, but I guess it doesn't matter because the people that I'm speaking of aren't even going to listen to this, so I guess it doesn't really matter.
Okay,
But I think that it's when it's people that are, in your life a lot and they're around your children and um it's people that you care about, you want to have a good relationship with, but because they can't see um how destructive or painful their behaviors and thoughts and ways of being are.
okay, so this makes sense because it's hard to be in a situation where people are unaware of their impact
Yeah.
on others.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay,
It's oblivion. It's the oblivion that drives me crazy.
okay,
And
okay,
it's not just that, it's also like all the attempts that I have tried to explain. I've been bold, I've been straightforward, I've been
okay. So it
careful, you
just in the
know.
interest of time, it makes sense because it's hard to be in situations where people are unaware of their impact and what
Hmm.
it's doing. And it's also hard to be in a situation where you're feeling unheard.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, man, you're good at this. You should be like a therapist or
I
something.
should. I should try that profession and see if it fits.
Yeah, that's really
So
good.
the next step would be to normalize, which is to say many people would feel similarly in a similar situation. Yes or no?
Absolutely.
I think most readers or listeners, there no one's reading this, but
No
most
one's reading.
listeners are saying, "Oh yeah, yeah, that doesn't feel good," when you get to be a witness to harm that you can't control, and you've tried to say something and affect change, and it has fallen on deaf ears.
Yes.
So yes, most people would feel frustrated and upset by that.
Thank you.
Okay.
That makes me feel
Well,
better.
okay, but we don't stop there because
Oh,
step number five,
I have to do
you
something now?
choose a value. Okay, you listed your values: compassion, love,
The one that
kindness,
brought this on was
authenticity, and faith.
authenticity.
Okay,
But
so
also the others all fit into it.
they all apply. So let's
They
just
are
choose
all a
one. I
part of
just
it.
want you to pick one of those that's going to help guide you as an anchor point, as a compass point, like true north for you. That's going to help you know what to do in this situation
Hmm. It's hard
or not to
because,
do. I mean, sometimes it's a decision to do something and sometimes it's a
yeah.
decision not to do something. But what is it anchored in? What is your choice anchored in? Is it in a higher self intention that's valued or an ego
Oh, man.
based, like limbic reaction? Which
Great
one?
question. Great question.
Hmm.
So there's two things, right?
Hmm.
Love, kindness, and compassion to me would suggest to me that I should extend grace to the oblivion.
Hmm.
But authenticity says to me that I should point it out once again, no matter how uncomfortable it's going to be, because I'm not being authentic in my response, and I don't feel like these individuals are being authentic with me.
Hmm. Okay, so you're going to have to decide which one.
I can't pick. Can it be not, can it
Well,
be a
what could be the struggle, Eric? I mean, man, this is getting like really therapeutic, but
mhm,
it could be, I want to use kindness as a value because I don't actually want to say anything because it's uncomfortable.
yeah.
And so I can just say, no, I'm being kind. Okay. Or I might not
Yeah.
want to use authenticity because uh I'll or I want to use authenticity because I really want to stick it to these guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, see,
Uh-huh.
either motive,
Mhm.
either value, you can manipulate your own thinking
That's
to
why,
taking the easier road.
that's why you have to know your shadow self. You have to know your
Yeah.
lower intention, your lower self intentions,
Yeah. I would say for
right?
me, it's going to boil down to kindness has to win.
Okay. And then you would have to decide, what does kindness look like right now in this moment, right? And this is development, Eric. This is differentiation because you have to decide,
I
what
would
does my
say
higher self feel like kindness means right now?
I would say it has to be pure pity.
Grace
Um,
or pity?
I'd say pity. Because despite my efforts to try and help raise awareness of the scenarios to these individuals, it's it's not something they're wanting to hear or
Yeah, right.
learn or even consider. And so it really does come down to pity. It's like I just feel this will sound like I'm God's gift to something. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying life can be so much better when you have a broader perspective on these things. And
Okay,
it's
but
just too bad, like the richness of the relationship that authenticity can bring is being missed.
and you can be sad about that. Like you get
It
to
is
mourn
sad.
that or
It's like a
grieve that.
funeral. Yeah, it's
Right.
like a
But the real
funeral.
question is how are you going to behave with these people?
That's what I can't figure. I
Right.
either, well, I think I just need to keep being kind. I just
Yes. There you go.
I just have to.
There
I
you
just
go.
have to keep doing it, and then I have
And
to recognize that I'm not bad for feeling upset about it. Um,
well,
and
and Eric, maybe what can be helpful in situations, at least as for me, is you can do what I call the turnaround, which is, when have I done that?
mhm.
When have I been the one that was blind to my
Yep,
behavior? Right. And
that's what
that's not to
that's what we have
justify
been
it
doing.
or say that
No,
it was okay, but it can help guide how you show up and how you behave because this is a boundary question you're asking me.
yep,
This is a boundary. It's a separation of tasks. What is my task and what is their task? And so
yeah,
you're really asking me a boundary question, a psychological, emotional, relational boundary question. That's what you're asking me, right? So I'm helping you use this this 6-step
The
process to help
value
you kind of
system.
anchor and find. So the last step would be, and we don't need to necessarily answer this because you're not quite there yet and you need time to sort it out. But the last one would be, what is an action I can take right now that aligns with that value? And what does that look like for me? And like I said, it might mean you just stay quiet and try to anchor yourself without being angrily responsive. Or maybe you need to get up and leave, but not call attention to yourself just to get a break. You decide what is that behavior that you need to do, that an action that you can take, but make sure it's aligned with a higher self intention or a value that can be really helpful in navigating difficult situations when there's a lot going on that you can't control. And it's bringing up a lot of discomfort, right? Can you see the growth that can happen when we learn how to do this? And if we're going to grow,
Yeah.
we've got to be able to tolerate that discomfort of being in a situation like that where there's so many factors we can't control and figuring out what we are responsible for.
This is what I just I want to say something to our listeners.
Mhm.
I'm experiencing it right now as I'm talking to you because I'm working through something that's real. That's like right in front of my face kind of a thing, right? And if there are any of our listeners who just have not trusted therapy, they've not trusted these sciences, they've not trusted it in any way, I wish you could feel what I feel in the inside. It's a feeling of discomfort, yes, but it's also a feeling of comfort. I know that
Mhm.
doesn't make sense, but it's like, okay, I know what I need to do, and that makes me uncomfortable. But I feel so much peace by knowing that I'm seen, by
Mhm.
knowing that I'm understood and that I'm understanding myself better.
Mhm.
And I just wish I just have so many conversations with people who have not it just are not willing to take that leap a little, to trust that process can actually help.
Mhm.
There's so much stigma that is attached to it, but anyway, sorry for reflecting a little
No,
bit,
I'm
but
glad you
I
said that. And I mean, there's more work we could do. This is not necessarily wrapped up, but we're starting to explore, right?
yeah,
And just starting to understand. And we can have, like I said, therapy is uncommon conversations.
yeah,
So can you go have an uncommon conversation to figure out your internal world
yeah.
and how you want to respond to it, to the external?
Well, I think this is so good because you're introducing this concept of values, and we literally just use that system to help guide my
Yes,
thinking and
yes,
make decisions.
yes. And it's interesting because you can talk about this all day in therapy and you can give people these frameworks and you can help them explore, but then going out and actually doing it in real time, that's where the tolerating this discomfort for growth and like applying these things where the rubber hits the road. But this is where human growth takes place, right here at the intersection of what you're talking about.
Yeah,
And so if therapy is supportive for you, it can be, go get that support because it can be really helpful to get knowledge and frameworks and support and a listening ear and someone to reflect back to you so you can figure out what you want to do and who you want to be.
yeah.
That's what's so good about therapy.
You
So,
know,
oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I'm being really honest, it's what I really value is Jesus. And I just value the way that he, what he values and what he taught. And I'm not so good at it. And that's okay. I'm getting there. But when I think about some of those examples of turning the other cheek and forgiveness and patience and kindness, to me it's deep inside my desire of and my value, and so I know what I need to do, and it's just a matter of doing it.
So you
You know,
have your target, you have your example, you have the values you're stretching towards. Now it's figuring out, what does healthy forgiveness look like? What is truly kind?
yeah, yep,
What does compassion really look like? We've got to get the correct understanding of those things so that we can head in that direction.
yeah.
Okay, so that wraps up, wow, our series on differentiation.
Hey,
So we
it's
just
been a
finished skill number
vacation.
4, tolerating discomfort for growth. And so I wish everybody luck as they adventure into this process of individuation and differentiation. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, meaningful process. And I hope we've helped in some way by discussing this. And I'm sure
Oh,
it will come
it's
up again in future episodes.
yeah, for sure. It's a definite wrestle, and I just want to thank you, Jill, for your wisdom and your directness, letting me kind of be the guinea pig so many times as we've gone through these things on differentiation, and today was no different. I mean, it was. I know you were saying it's a boundary question, right? And that is, it's that's how do you navigate differentiation to building healthy boundaries and
Well, this is where application comes in, right? Real
yeah.
application in the real life world of relationships. And so that's where we're going to head next. In fact, this is a little teaser. Our next episode is going to be about boundaries. So you'll
Hmm.
start to see where all of these skills intersect and play out in actual relationships in real time. It's exciting.
Perfect. How convenient.
Yeah, isn't it though?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Hey,
Eric, it's
great
been
job,
great talking
Jill.
to you. And thanks for being a good guinea pig when being so willing to just
Uh,
kind of expose yourself in this way.
well,
So,
if it comes back to bite me, dear listeners, just know I cared about you. I just wanted you to feel, like
uh,
learn something. And anyway, well, thanks,
okay.
Jill.